There are moments in life that hit you like a slow-motion punch, where the air gets thick and every sound sharpens until you can hear your own heartbeat thundering in your ears. And for me, that moment arrived on a crisp fall morning when I stood at the water's edge of the lake my father had carved from raw earth with nothing but determination and a borrowed backhoe. The surface still as glass, reflecting the first golden light of dawn, when suddenly the silence shattered under the growl of diesel engines, a parade of flatbed trucks snaking down the private road, barges being launched like invading warships, massive turbines glinting in the sun as cranes swung them into position right in the middle of my family's private water, all without a single phone call, without one courteous visit, without even the faintest trace of embarrassment on their faces. And I just stood there, Nathan Caldwell, clutching the faded deed I'd already waved in front of them months earlier, the one they'd dismissed with condescending smiles in a packed community hall, because the Riverside Crest Homeowners Association had unilaterally decided that my lake, the one with our name etched into every legal record for half a century, was now the ideal location for their grand microhydroelectric project, a gift to the community they boasted. And in that instant, as the first drill bit screamed into the lake bed, kicking up clouds of silt that turned the clear water murky brown, the hook buried itself deep in my chest, a searing mix of disbelief, grief, and a slow-burning fury, because this wasn't just about property lines or water rights anymore. It was about erasing a man's life work, about stealing the one place where his memory still felt close enough to touch, and somewhere in the quiet depths of my soul, a promise formed, cold and certain, that justice, when it finally arrived, would come with the deep, relentless sound of water finding its way back into the earth. My dad, Thomas Caldwell, started digging this lake in the spring of 1976, a civil engineer by trade, but a builder by blood, the kind of man who spoke more with his hands and his mouth, who spent weekends and vacations hauling dirt, redirecting natural springs, compacting clay until his palms bled, all to create something that would outlast him, a 22-acre mirror of water nestled in a gentle valley on land our family had owned since the 1940s. And for him, it wasn't investment or status. It was legacy, proof that hard work and quiet stubbornness could shape the world, protected by meticulously recorded water rights, surveyed plat maps, and limited easements that allowed only utility access along the edges, never dominion over the lake itself. And as a kid, I grew up watching him fine-tune the overflow pipes, teaching me how water always seeks balance, how a well-designed system can protect both the land and the life it supports. And we'd spend endless summer evenings on the hand-built dock, fishing for bass that never seemed to bite when we needed them to, laughing at nothing, the lake becoming the silent witness to every milestone, every heartbreak, every ordinary day that felt extraordinary because we shared it. So when cancer took him 5 years ago, scattering his ashes across that water felt like the only fitting goodbye. And inheriting the lake wasn't about money. It was about guardianship, about keeping safe the one place where I could still hear his voice in the wind. Across the reeds, making the sight of strangers, turning it into an industrial zone feel like a personal violation, a grief reopened with heavy machinery. The early warning signs were almost laughably brazen, bright pink survey flags popping up overnight along the shoreline like invasive flowers. No knock on my door. No heads up from a neighbor. Just crews in orange vests striding across ground my father had graded himself, measuring and marking as if the deed in my safe didn't exist, and orchestrating it all was Vanessa Hargrove, the newly installed president of the Riverside Crest HOA. A former corporate executive with the posture of a general, and the smile of someone who'd never heard the word no. Her emails crisp, her meeting agendas airtight, convinced that her vision of sustainable community infrastructure trumped individual rights, especially when the individual in question was a quiet widower who preferred solitude to subcommittee meetings. The first open confrontation unfolded in the fluorescent glare of the community center. Rows of folding chairs filled with residents clutching coffee cups, renderings projected on a pull-down screen showing sleek turbines and glowing promises of lower electric bills. Vanessa at the microphone, painting a future where the neighborhood led the charge in green energy, partnering with evergreen power solutions to harness our shared natural resources. And when I rose, legs steady but stomach churning, laying out the original deed, the plat map, 50 years of unchallenged private ownership, photographic evidence of my father's construction permits. She deflected with practiced ease, murmuring about evolving community needs and ongoing legal review, then smoothly moving to the vote, the room raising hands in favor before I could finish my sentence, the gavel falling like a door slamming shut. And driving home that night, the lake dark and accusing under the moonlight, I felt the injustice settle into my bones, the suppressed anger mingling with sorrow for what my dad would have thought seeing his masterpiece treated like a public utility. The first act ending on the grim certainty that they intended to build regardless of law, regardless of consent, because power, once tasted, rarely asks permission. The transformation happened with breathtaking speed. 1 week the lake was still mine in every meaningful way. The next it was a construction yard, massive barges anchored where I used to cast a line, generators humming day and night, silt plumes spreading like bruises across the surface, cheerful blue signs bolted to my private dock proclaiming this a community energy initiative powered by neighborly cooperation. The irony, so thick you could spread it on toast, and every dawn I'd walk the perimeter, coffee growing cold in my hand, watching strangers in hard hats reshape the shoreline my father had so carefully contoured, the grief sharpening into something harder, something that kept me awake cataloging every violation, every trespass, because this wasn't abstract bureaucracy anymore. This was the desecration of sacred ground, the place where I'd proposed to my late wife, where we'd planned a future that never came, now scarred by concrete footings and coiled cable. I fought the way you're supposed to fight, through lawyers and letters, filing emergency cease and desist orders, petitioning the county for enforcement, only to watch the HOA respond with dense motions claiming my water rights were subordinate to community interest, citing obscure environmental statutes they twisted like pretzels, and when deputies arrived they shrugged, calling it a civil dispute, while planning officials suddenly discovered a passion for renewable energy that made them deaf to my documented permits. And there's a weary humor in that, isn't there? How the system rushes to embrace green when it means siding with the many against the one, leaving me standing alone on the dock, wind whipping the water into angry chops, feeling the full weight of isolation, the bi-weekly of being dismissed as obstinate when all I wanted was to protect what was already legally mine. The social campaign was subtler, but cut deeper. Glossy newsletters delivered to every mailbox portraying me as the greedy holdout blocking progress. Social media posts from accounts I'd never heard of lamenting the one neighbor standing in the way of lower bills and a cleaner future. And gradually the casual wave from dog walkers stopped. Invitations to block parties dried up. Old acquaintances crossing the street rather than meet my eyes. And I'd sit on the porch at dusk, the construction lights glaring across the water like accusatory eyes, wondering how fear of higher dues could turn decent people into accomplices so quickly, the loneliness compounding the loss, making the lake feel like the last true friend I had left. Then, on a rainy afternoon, sorting through my father's old workshop, boxes of blueprints yellowed with age, I found a forgotten key, detailed schematics for an emergency release system he'd engineered in the 1980s to prevent catastrophic flooding during 100-year storms. A network of gated pipes running underground to a downstream wetland preserve the EPA had certified as protected habitat, fully permitted at the time, grandfathered through every regulatory change since, still functional, still under my sole control, and tracing those lines with trembling fingers, I felt something shift inside, a spark of possibility amid the despair, the realization that my father, ever the planner, had left me more than memories. He'd left leverage, a lawful mechanism no one else even remembered existed, and in that moment the suppressed emotion began to uncoil, grief transmuting into resolve, love for his foresight fueling a plan that would reclaim what words and courts had failed to protect. As the power station neared completion, turbines gleaming, control buildings rising. Vanessa grew bolder, sending certified letters warning of severe financial consequences for any interference, accusing me preemptively of planning sabotage, secure in the assumption that I was too rule-abiding, too worn down by loss to ever act decisively. And there's a dark chuckle in that arrogance. How tyrants always underestimate the quiet ones. But by then, I understood the brutal math. Legal proceedings. Crawl while concrete sets fast. And if I waited for judges and appeals, the lake would be forever altered, the tension building night after night until it felt like the water itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to choose a different battlefield, to wield the tool my father had quietly bequeathed, the climax gathering like storm clouds over still water. I sent one final notice, measured and emotionless, delivered by every traceable method the law recognizes, stating plainly that unless all unauthorized equipment was removed by midnight on the specified date, I would activate the pre-existing, permitted emergency drainage system to protect downstream wetlands. No threats, no bluster, just the calm certainty of someone who knows exactly where he stands. And when the deadline passed in silence, I walked out to the valve house beneath a sky thick, with stars, phone on a tripod recording every second, timestamp glowing, reading aloud the original permits, the EPA certifications, the plat notes confirming my exclusive control. Then, with deliberate slowness, I turned the wheel, opening gates my father had welded himself, not laying a finger on their machinery, not damaging a single bolt of theirs, simply exercising a right older than their entire development. And within minutes the lake began to exhale, water rushing through hidden conduits toward the preserve, the level dropping with a steady, inexorable grace, the way truth eventually finds its path. The physical fallout unfolded like poetry in reverse. Barges tilting as their pontoons scraped bottom, turbines spinning down without hydraulic pressure, the entire station going dark and silent. And then the subdivision's lights began to flicker and die street by street as the promised community power vanished into thin air, the blackout spreading like dominoes. And I stood on the dock watching the chaos unfold across the water. The deep gurgle of draining pipes, almost soothing, a lullaby my Dad would have understood, the pent-up rage and sorrow finally releasing in a flood of vindication, tempered by the bittersweet knowledge that it had taken this to make them listen, the night air electric with consequence. Vanessa roared up in her SUV, headlights slicing through the darkness, voice cracking as she hurled accusations of vandalism and terrorism, demanding immediate arrest, only to be met by the city utility supervisor who'd arrived for the outage. Then state environmental officers reviewing my documentation under flashlight beams, my video evidence playing on loop, their own absence of permits suddenly glaring under scrutiny, and by morning the reversals cascaded like an avalanche. Emergency stop. Work orders taped to every piece of equipment. Federal wetland violation notices issued. Investigations launched into how an entire project had proceeded without required approvals. The whole illusion of authority crumbling under the weight of simple recorded fact. The wider collapse followed swiftly, television vans parking along the road, reporters interviewing furious residents wrapped in blankets during the prolonged blackout, social media turning from condemnation to outrage at the deception, the HOA's reputation evaporating like morning mist, Vanessa resigning in a late-night emergency session amid calls for accountability. Evergreen Power Solutions issuing a public withdrawal and admitting civil trespass to avoid crippling lawsuits. Every turbine and barge removed at their expense over the following months. The lakebed scars slowly healing as pumps restored the water level. New permanent signs erected declaring private lake, federally protected downstream wetland outlet. Boundaries finally respected. Neighbors approaching one by one with apologies and offers of help. Community dialogue reopening on terms of honesty rather than intimidation. In the quiet aftermath, there was no parade, no victory speech, just still evenings back on the rebuilt dock, watching dragonflies skim water that once again belonged undisturbed. My father's legacy not merely defended, but reaffirmed, the grief softened into gratitude for the foresight he'd left behind. And there's a gentle irony in how the loudest champions of progress fell silent when confronted with older, truer engineering, a reminder that real power doesn't reside in titles or renderings or self-congratulatory slogans. It lives in understanding the land, understanding the law, understanding the quiet leverage built decades ago by a man who trusted systems more than promises, because water, like justice, always seeks its natural level, no matter how long it's dammed. This is the story of what happens when ordinary people are pushed far enough to protect what's sacred, when love for family and memory becomes stronger than fear of consequence, proving that rightful reclamation isn't vengeance, it's restoration, the kind that heals deeper wounds than any court could reach. So tell me, if an HOA started drilling into the lake your parent dug with their own hands, turning your sanctuary into their power plant without so much as asking, what would you do? Would you exhaust every polite avenue until nothing remained? Or is there a point where defending your birthright demands a bolder stroke, walking that razor edge where lawful self-defense and outright rebellion blur under moonlight, where the line between justice and something darker depends entirely on who holds the deed? Drop your answer in the comments, like if this one hit close to home, and subscribe for more stories where the little guy reminds the world that some things simply can't be taken without the earth itself pushing back. Like, comment, subscribe. This is LULU Stories, where progress always meets its consequences.